Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and to talk about the Dark Elves and what makes them an S tier race, one of the strongest races in the game, one of the best races in the game as well to actually play. See, you can have a strong race, but they're not necessarily great to play, but the Dark Elves are both very strong and they're also great to play. There are reasons why a significant number of people do dislike the way the Dark Elves are handled, but they do have a significant number of benefits in their campaigns, in all of their campaigns. There is no Dark Elf Legendary Lord that's weak, except Rakarth, and it's more so because of his starting position and his faction effects just not being all that great. But even then, Rakarth is still very playable, just a bit slower than the others. So anyway, when we're talking about the Dark Elves, what makes them good? Let's go over this. Well, first off, when it comes to the economy, the Dark Elves have one of the highest, if not the highest, economic potential in terms of, in the entire game, in terms of raw income. I'm not talking about income from trading, I'm not talking about income from looting and sacking settlements, though they also get a good amount of that. Rather, I'm just talking pure income. So their guild holds generate 700 income per turn. Now, you do need to have 35 slaves, but this is a tier 3 building that, by the way, just to give you an idea, when I talk about like Kislev being bad, Kislev pays 1,000 for 100. Dark Elves pay 1,500 for 700. Yes, you do need slaves, 53 or more slaves, but it is an absurd level of power. And even then, like, even if you took away the slaves, by the way, fun fact, this would still be better than Kislev because it's cheaper to get this and faster to get this, because like tier 1 you get 100 income, that's the same as Kislev, but it's half the cost. But regardless, their economy is strong, though they do depend on slaves to make it work. But slaves aren't really an issue. You will gain a lot of slaves per turn. You can maintain a huge economy with just one single battle per turn. While it certainly doesn't lend itself well to a more passive playstyle, which I think is one of the issues some people have with them, it is a playstyle that does work very well within the context of Warhammer 3. Because in Warhammer 3, being able to be aggressive very quickly in your campaign is a significant benefit that shouldn't be discounted. So that's one of the things that the Dark Elves do have in their favor. The second thing that they have in their favor, introduced with the Forge of the Chaos Dwarves, is instant construction. So you can get slaves through battles, and you can then use slaves to instantly construct settlement buildings. So you can very quickly build up a lot of territory in your empire. And that is a pretty solid benefit. Furthermore, they have good growth as well. Now, the way their growth works is a bit different than other races. I mean, they do have regular settlement buildings, and those settlement buildings do have growth. That is absolutely the case. But it's not the settlement buildings or the estates of the masters that generate the most growth in a Dark Elven campaign. Those will be pretty decent, but it's not really how you can get amazing growth for the Dark Elves. Rather, it's with the slave drive diktat. So the Dark Elves are driven by slaves. You use slaves to instantly construct buildings, you use slaves to generate growth, you use slaves to generate money, similar to how the Chaos Dwarves do it. And you also use slaves to give you a temporary control benefit in a province if you are going to face a rebellion. So over here, it is likely that I am going to face a rebellion unless I do something. Just click a button, and that's it. No problem. And I will be able to regenerate the slaves that I just spent very, very quickly in this campaign without any real issue. So that's their economy, that's their growth. It ends up being a fairly substantial benefit in their campaign, the way they end up working in a very large number of ways. Now, on top of that, What makes the Dark Elves great and a really powerful race isn't just the way their economy works, it's also the fact that they have a fairly good unit roster. It might feel a bit limited in the end game to be sure about it, but when you're looking at the Dark Elven roster, it is quite a very powerful one. Now, they don't have global recruitment. If you're playing a Dark Elven campaign, you are not going to have global recruitment. Instead, what you do have is Black Ark recruitment. So you can obviously recruit units on land just as anyone else. That isn't a problem. You get a barracks chain, you recruit units. But what you can also do is you can do a right every 25 turns. If you're low tier, you get a lot more of these, but you can get every 25 turns a Black Ark. Malice Darkblade over here, he starts with one. Now, what a Black Ark will do is it will allow you to recruit units in a radius around it. So you see this circle over here? Any army that's in that radius can recruit units from the Black Ark. And you can obviously recruit units from one Black Ark to another. So over here, you can recruit Black Ark Corsairs. And actually you can recruit every single Dark Elven unit, but by default you'll start with a barracks or a Corsair cabin on the Black Ark. And this will allow you to recruit Black Ark Corsairs and Black Ark Corsairs with handbows. The handbows have a ranged weapon, but they lose their dual weapons, so the dual sword infantry choice is better. Now, Black Ark Corsairs are great early game units because, one, they're heavily armored, so they have 80 armor, they do a good amount of damage in melee, they have an anti-infantry bonus, and while they don't have a significant amount of armor piercing, they're quite capable of dealing with any early game threat. Besides, you have plenty of options when it comes to armor piercing as the Dark Elves. That isn't an issue. So you have really good early game infantry with the Black Ark Corsairs. You have good line holders with the Dread Spears that can hold quite well, the equivalent of the High Elf Spearmen. And you have good range units with the Dark Shards that you can recruit from Tier 1. Or the Dark Shards with shields that you can recruit from Tier 2. The difference is that the shielded version has a silver shield, so they're better at dealing with ranged attackers. Or surviving the damage of ranged attackers. Later on in the campaign, you can get things like Shades, though to be fair, Shades can be a bit expensive, undeniably so, but they are quite good. And they can, because they have both, because the Greatsword version in particular has armor piercing both melee and ranged, and they also have stock, though they lose the silver shield. In terms of melee capability, you can go with things like Harganeth Executioners, or you can even go down the path of picking up the Black Guard of Nagrand, which are heavily armored, though they do lack a shield of any kind, but they're heavily armored, they do a lot of armor-piercing damage, and they have bonus against large. Furthermore, another thing that's great about the Dark Elves is their lore choices. The Dreadlords, both of them, are good. I prefer the Dreadlord with sword and shield, though the one with sword and crossbow can also work. The difference is you do lose obviously the shield, so you're gonna miss that out, and you get the difference between rally and loose, or not rally. It's a different ability actually. So you get the difference like in terms of abilities. You either get melee attack, or you get reload time if you go with sword and crossbow. And then, of course, you do get High Beastmasters, not so great, but you do get Supreme Sorceresses as well. You do have to deal with loyalty, which is always a bit of a downside, especially when you're dealing with confederations. But overall, the Dark Elf lore choices, they're fairly solid. Dreadlords are the best because they can gain Black Dragons as a mount choice. And then, on top of that, they also have an amazing hero capacity capability in their campaigns. So from a tier 2 barracks, they can increase master capacity. From a tier 3 settlement, either major or minor settlement, they can get a Shrine of Cain, which in every campaign except Morathi increases your Death Hag and Knight Assassin capacity. Morathi can get just as many Death Hags, you just can't get as many Knight Assassins, but that's fine, Knight Assassins aren't the best anyway. And from Provincial Capitals, you can get 1 hero capacity for Sorceresses. You can't get hero capacity for Sorceresses in a minor settlement, unfortunately, but you will have plenty of magic users to use in a campaign. So, good economy, good unit roster, Black Arcs, and the thing about the Black Arcs is that you can attack with the Black Arc army. Like, this particular settlement was taken over by this Black Arc that I sent over here. And I'm gonna take the Serpent Jetty in just 1 or 2 turns over here, probably 2 turns, by Admiral Leech in this campaign situation. They can attack, they can recruit heroes. They don't increase hero capacity, but they can recruit heroes. Every hero type, every unit type. And you can maintain armies very cheaply, up to minus 60% upkeep on a Black Arc. So you can get an army, like, look at this army right here. Like, yes, I am recruiting 6 units, but 10 units for 850 free upkeep is fairly cheap. That's because I get minus 55% upkeep, and the barracks itself is giving me a minus 4%. So really, I'm at minus 59% upkeep over here, and it's going to improve. And you can do this for every unit type, everything that you want. Also, Black Arcs do have army abilities, so you get artillery, basically, Cain's Lash, Sky Cauldron, and Soul Ring as abilities. So you have a great deal of naval power. You're the dominant faction at sea. If you're playing the Dark Elves, you have good armies on land. You can take a coastal settlement with the Black Arc army, transporting your army over there cheaply, and then recruit a lord, either from the Black Arc or from the settlement you just took, to move further inland. So there's a lot of campaign flexibility because of that. Furthermore, the Dark Elves, while they may not necessarily have the best climate suitability of every campaign in the world, they do stand generally better than many other campaigns. Like, just to give you an example, Mallet's Darkblade over here can take Frozen, he can take Chaos Wasteland, he can take Mountains, he can take Ulthuan, he can take Jungle. So basically, in this campaign, I can go, I start here, and I can conquer every bit of territory to here, and also here. That's the kind of flexibility that we're talking about Dark Elves. Now, to be fair, Mallet's Darkblade is in a better situation than, say, Malekith or Lokir. But generally speaking, with the Dark Elves, they will be able to take the Chaos Wasteland, Frozen, and Ulthuan. So they're not necessarily, as I stated, they're not generally the best, but they're in a pretty solid state when it comes to terrain with climate suitability. On top of that, because it doesn't end there, on top of that, not only do they have a good economy, not only do they get a good amount of income from looting and sacking settlements, not only do they have artillery support and being able to get a lot of armies very cheaply, they have the Sacrifice to Cain, which gives them a further army ability that's pretty powerful, income from post-battle loot, casualty replenishment. They do have some downsides. One of them is that they don't have an encamp stance. So when you're dealing with attrition in a territory, you can't just switch to an encamp stance. You can use raiding stance, but there's issues with that particular approach. Encamp stance would generally be better, but you don't have that as the Dark Elves, unfortunately. That is one of the downsides. They do have that, and the fact that they don't have global recruitment. But one of the interesting things to consider with the Dark Elves that many people may not consider is that Dark Elves are in a position to dominate via diplomacy. You could argue the High Elves can do it with the influence system, but the Dark Elves do it passively. Let me explain. So, the Dark Elves are not hated by a huge number of factions. Now, I can't necessarily show it over here, but like, let's just look at Grombrindle over here. He hates Malekith. He hates me implicitly as a result of that, because I start out allied with Malekith as Mallet's Darkblade. But the aversion that he feels, while it is certainly significant, it is manageable. And it's actually one of the higher levels of aversion, now minus 60. Typically speaking, the worst you're gonna get with the factions of order is minus 40. If you're considering other factions in a campaign, the aversion is very, very manageable. Minus 40 with Beastmen, minus 10 with Greenskins, minus 10 with Norska. And if we look minus 10 with the Tomb King. So they do have some level of aversion. Factions do generally dislike them. But there is one thing for a faction to be disliked, or a race to be disliked. It's another thing to be universally hated. The Dark Elves are not universally hated in campaigns. And that is one of the benefits they do have in those respective campaigns that give them a significant amount of power that they can deal with. Though, by the way, it's a bad idea to recruit a lord like I just did, because, yeah, he's likely, and try and disband him, because that's likely going to result in a rebellion. But regardless, the Dark Elves are in a pretty strong state. They have all of these benefits. And they have the potential, because of their economy combined with Black Arcs, combined with their diplomatic benefit, they have the potential of painting the map in a way that very few other factions can. Now, to be sure, it is more focused on the northern part of the map, the frozen part, the Norscan part, Ulfwan, all that, than the south. Though if you're playing Malice Darkblade, you can certainly do so. Lokir is focused on the east. That can work. But generally speaking, the northern part of the map. If you have jungle, yeah, you can focus on Lustria, but you're not going to go into Empire too much. But you can make a multiracial alliances. Like one campaign I played as Marathi, a relatively long campaign, ended up being pretty ridiculous because I ended up allying with basically all of Lustria, all of the Empire, Bretonia, the dwarves, and it ended up being absolutely bananas. And also, fun fact, I was also allied. With chaos factions at the same time. It ended up being pretty ridiculous. Like when you can ally Skaven and the Empire, it's like the diplomatic potential and make that work. Sure, it's a difficult balancing on making it work, but you can make it work. But when you can do something like that and make it work in your campaign, you end up with a significant amount of campaign potential. So with all of this being said, you might ask, rightly, why do so many people hate the Dark Elves? Why is it that the Reddit meta, if you will, is firmly against the Dark Elves? Why is it that quite a few people, when they do videos on rankings for this game, including Legend of Total War, rate the Dark Elves generally poorly? I'll be honest, I think it really boils down to the fact that there's plenty of people who really like the Dark Elves, or like their mechanics in Warhammer 2, and don't like how they are handled in Warhammer 3. I personally think that the Dark Elves are far stronger in Warhammer 3 than they were in 2, but that's my perspective when it boils down to it. It's certainly different. Like, in Warhammer 2, you had a slave system that was province-based. You could stack slaves in a single province and get a ridiculous amount of money. That's no longer the case with the slave system. That's really the critical difference in the Dark Elves. It's like how the slave system works. But the slave system, sure, it's good for the instant construction, but I don't really care. I didn't really care for the slave system on Warhammer 2. Sure, it had a lot of potential, but people talking about like, oh, how great it was and how horrible it is in Warhammer 3, I admit I don't understand that. Like, I don't think it was that great in Warhammer 2. I think it was certainly abusable, and it's certainly powerful, but well-designed, balanced, not quite. And it's kind of interesting, the Dark Elves, like, the reason Dark Elves are more powerful is that while their slave economy is nowhere near as powerful, their base economy is substantially better. Now, people who want more passive campaigns, you might dislike them, but as I stated, Warhammer 3 is all about like being aggressive, taking territory, consolidating that territory. And the Dark Elves certainly work within the context of that playstyle. That's one of the reasons they're one of the best races, because they excel at taking large swaths of territory, building it up. In fact, while this is early on and I'm going bankrupt over here, it's turn 14. Like, look at what I'm doing over here in turn 14. I've got 2 entire armies that are about 4k each, close to 4k gold each. I'm getting a 3rd stack of troops right here. And I'm doing this in the context in which I only have really 3 provinces. Well, 4, getting closer to 4, but just thereabouts. In 14 turns. 20 turns, I'll tell you what I'll be in 20 turns. I'll be over here, marching towards Alifanar to wipe him out, and then taking all of this territory by turn 30, and then invading Ulfwan with half a dozen stacks. That's where I'll be in this campaign. Assuming I don't end up in a war with Daniel for whatever reason. Jaeger, fun fact. So they are incredible on the campaign map, but there's obviously a distaste, especially from a very large number of people who played a lot of Warhammer 2, liked the design of Warhammer 2, don't care so much for the design of Warhammer 3. Personally, I'm gonna say it, I think Warhammer 3 is the better game. Like, there's a lot of rose-tinted goggles. Don't get me wrong, I'm gonna be clear on this. If I could have the battle dynamics, the range combat, the melee combat of Warhammer 2 without the melee buffs in Warhammer 3, I would easily take that any day of the week over what the crap we deal with in Warhammer 3. But in terms of campaign mechanics, yeah, Warhammer 3 is better. That's where I stand. Questine here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.